Hi there, Chris here with another quick tip for y'all. In this video, we're going to look at restoring dried out paint. Now, it's a little bit misleading as a completely dried out bottle of paint is kind of unsalvageable. The amount of work that you would need to do to restore the paint really just isn't worth your effort. We're going to look here at a bottle of paint that is mostly dried out. Now you can see the lid is still a little bit moist, and you can see the paint is sitting at the bottom, and you can kind of see the medium sitting right at the bottom there as it kind of sloshes around and such. And so if you see that, then it's probably mostly salvageable. And really, okay, so let's look at why does that occur? Well, it occurs a lot with these flip top lids. Often what can end up happening is this little tab here that is on the back of the bottle can get stuck underneath the lid. You end up having this kind of situation where, and you can see here how it's crimped, bottle will not shut properly, and that lets air in, and air is what is going to dry out your paint. And you can see here, and this is pretty much how I found this bottle, and so that's how I know it was a good example to use. That's often what ends up happening. Another one is the paint will build up, often right at the back and behind the lip here. Paint will build up there just from repeated use. It's really not anybody's kind of fault with why that happens. So let me fix this right now. And that's about one of the better ways to fix it. Just find something that just gently push that back. Nothing sharp like your X-Acto blade, as this is really soft plastic and you're likely to just cut right through it. When you know your bottle is completely shut is when these two lines of the lid are parallel all the way around, and you can see how it almost looks like when it was store-bought. That's when you know that you're not gonna let any air in. And just because the lid is caked with paint, and when you shut it, you think, oh, well, it's good enough, right? But no, it's air is, because there's still little pockets in the divots of the paint and such, and so air will travel through there and dry out your paint. Now, to double check your bottle of paint to see if it is salvageable, just find something. I'm using an old paintbrush here that really doesn't have a whole lot of bristles left to it. And if you can push the brush in, or whatever you happen to use, and you can see how the paint can still move around, then you can still bring this back to a normal paint consistency. And so let's get a little bit out and then have a look here. As you can see, the paint is really thick, but it is still very salvageable. The paint in this consistency is actually more like the current dry compound. To bring it back, we'll use a little medium. Now, you don't have to use the Games Workshop medium with the Games Workshop paints. You can use other thinning mediums, whatever you happen to have on hand or in abundance of. And so with just a little bit of medium, you can see how immediately the paint has come back to a good flow. There's no chunks, and you can see covers well again. And that was just with a tiny bit of thinning medium, and it brought the paint right back. Now, with your paints kind of dry like that, you can use them more like the dry compound. Because the dry compounds, if you look at them, they look almost exactly the same. It's like dry paint. It's a drying paint. And when you take your dry compound and you slap it onto the palette, look how it's just sitting there like a little chunk of, globby of paint, right? And you think, well, you can't paint with that. Well, you take your little medium, put a fairly heavy load onto the brush, not too heavy, just enough to really soak the bristles, and you mix it with the paint on here, and you can see all of a sudden it starts coming back and it acts more like normal paint. This is quite a bit of medium actually I put into this. I thought it'd be need a little bit more to bring it back, but it doesn't really require that much. And you can see now all of a sudden with our dry compound, you have the edge paints, and look at that. Flows nice, no chunks. Flows just as good as that one. A little bit more medium, and then you got something really good going on. And so for our dried out paints or drying out paints, like I said, the dried out paints, they're just It's just not going to happen. It's just too much work to break down the pigments that have settled at the bottom. The medium has separated and has evaporated, and so you have this really heavy layer of essentially pigment. It's really just too much work to try and restore that. Like what time you spend in trying to separate all that pigment, you know, and get it into a workable state again, the time you will spend is not worth the time of picking up a new bottle. But you can save yourself that effort by making sure that your lids always close properly. Really quickly here, I'm going to grab a little bit of thinning medium. This is the regular stuff I use whenever I'm thinning down my paints. Games Workshop stuff is just as good. It's essentially all just the same. And so we're just going to throw in a whole bunch there. You can see how there's a whole bunch sitting in there now. And basically we're just going to stir it up. That's it. So we stir, 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 stir. And you're going to have to do a lot of stirring. And even as you hit the bottom, you can kind of feel how the paint is. Even using something like if you had a small palette knife, I wouldn't use your X-Acto blade or anything like that. That would be... So now the paint is starting to behave more like paint again. A bit more medium. Don't worry too if you don't get it all in the first try. Depending on the situation that you're trying to deal with, you just simply add a bit more medium. Now it's easier to add more medium, overdoing it with the medium and completely messing it up. You can see now, you can see how the paint is still fairly chunky looking. That's why we're adding more medium, because we want this back to a fluid state again. Keep stirring, just keep stirring, just keep stirring. It can often take a little while. Now see, as I've mentioned before, that once the paint has kind of gotten to this really kind of thick kind of state, and you know, it's really just a lot of work to bring it back. Oftentimes I won't bother because I find it easier just to grab a whole new bottle. Water can also be used to thin the paint back down and restore it, but water is not as good as the acrylic medium, because the acrylic medium with the water, you're just going to end up having a faster separation once the paint, you've restored your paint. Using the medium, at least it's the proper chemicals mixing together again, rather than having water evaporate real fast again on you and you're back to square one again. Still a little goopy, but it is starting to flow now, as you can see here. Before it wasn't flowing, now starting to flow. Paint is mostly restored. Again, we can just continue to add more medium to it, kind of gets the point across. In conclusion, a completely dried out bottle of paint is really not worth your time to try and salvage. You're better off just spending the $5, getting yourself another bottle of paint. For what time you'll spend to restore it. When the paint has been, you know, improperly sealed and it's starting to dry out and it's still salvageable, well, obviously there we go. We brought this one back to a working state, and even when it was still in that chunky state, we still could just apply a little bit of medium and use what we needed to bring back and control. And again, you can see with this one, even with paints that are designed that way, we can still thin it down with a medium, either Games Workshop's medium or anybody else's, you know, Vallejo's, Liquitex, anybody like that. The thinning mediums. Liquitex actually would have been a nice one to showcase with this one. That is quickly restoring drying paint. Really, it's to restore dried out paint it would be just too much work versus your time versus money. You're better off just picking up another bottle of paint. I hope you found that informative. And so hopefully you found that quick tip video informative and useful. For the next quick tip video, leave a comment below, or if somebody beats you to it, give that comment a thumbs up. And we'll see you in the next video. Happy wargaming.